My wife handed me divorce papers in the break room. My stepson, the director of operations, stood behind her, smiling, waiting for me to break. 34 years on that cold floor, and neither of them knew a dead man's lawyer had already signed $1.2 billion over to me. 71% of the voting shares. The company that owned the plant. The company that signed his paycheck. I set down my empty coffee cup and signed their papers without a word. 127 days later, I walked into that boardroom on the 34th floor as the man who owned it. The smile died first. Welcome to Bitter Autumn. I'm grateful you're here tonight. Before we go on, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, your country, your city. I read every one. Also, please note, this story includes fictional elements added for entertainment and education, and any resemblance to names or places is purely coincidental. The lesson inside it, though, is worth keeping. The break room coffee machine took my last $2.75 and left me holding an empty cup. I stood there with the paper cup in my hand and listened to the machine hum louder than it ever poured, and I thought about how a man can work 34 years in a building and still lose an argument with a vending machine. The floor was concrete and cold through my boots. Frost was still melting off my sleeves from the dock, running down the canvas in thin, dark lines. On the other side of that door, the air held at 28 degrees. In here, it was maybe 55, and it felt tropical. Down through the floor came the compressors, that low, steady note they make when the plant is running right, like a held breath nobody lets out. I have listened to that sound since I was 24 years old. I can tell you what is wrong with a machine by the way it breathes. Then the door opened. I never see that door open. Not at 2:40 on a Tuesday. At 2:40 on a Tuesday, the break room belongs to whoever has a bad knee, and 10 minutes, and that day it was me. Lorraine walked in. My wife of 20 years had never once set foot inside that plant. 20 years, and she had never come past the gate. She came in wearing the good gray wool coat, the one she keeps brushed, and she stepped around a wet patch on the concrete, like the floor might reach up and stain her. Julian was half a step behind her. Charcoal overcoat, nothing on the hem, gloves still on. He never takes those gloves off in this building. He has been director of operations at Renner Group Holdings for 9 years now, 3 promotions in, and in all that time I have not once seen him put a bare hand on cold metal. He was already smiling. Neither of them said hello. Lorraine set a manila folder on the long steel table, the one with the bent corner that has been bent since before Julian could walk, and slid it across to me. The corner caught it and turned it slightly, the way it turns everything. I read 3 lines. That was all it took. A petition to end a marriage filed with the county. My name. Her name. Divorce papers dated and prepared and already signed on her side in the careful hand she uses for other people's closings. I could feel the room waiting. That is the thing I remember best. Not the paper. The waiting. Julian had not come for his mother. He had come because somewhere in his head there was a version of this where the old one in the work boots put a fist through the drywall or shouted or sat down and cried, and he wanted a seat for it. The boy I had raised since he was 4 had staged the whole thing for a man who shouts. I have never been that man. I looked at the empty cup in my hand instead. I set it down on the steel table, careful well off the bent corner so it would not tip. Then I took the black ballpoint out of my chest pocket, the one that rides next to the flat carpenter pencil, and I clicked it once. Don't make this hard, Walter Lorraine said. It doesn't look hard, I said. Just show me the line. She put a finger on the page without looking down at it. Her nail was done. Her hands were folded under each other. A second later, the way she folds them. I signed. My hand did not shake. I have set bearings with that hand at 10 degrees with a torch burning behind me, and it did not shake for that either. Julian's smile slipped. That's it. No fight. You've been fighting me for years, son, I said. I just never fought back. I only use that word when I want it to land. It landed. You don't even care, Lorraine said, and it came out like an accusation she had rehearsed. I care, I said. I just already know how it ends. Julian laughed once without sound. 20 years and you sign it standing up in a break room. It's where I was standing, I said. I took my copy, squared the edges against the table, and folded it in thirds. That is how paper goes in a pocket. Anything else and it works itself into a ball by the end of a shift. 34 years of requisitions and work orders and inspection tags, and I have never carried a page any other way. Then I picked the cup back up. I do not know why. It was empty. It had been empty the entire time, and it stayed empty, and I stood there holding it like it was worth something. That was when Julian's smile failed. Not all at once. It went out of the eyes first, and hung on the mouth a second longer, the way a compressor keeps turning after you pull the breaker. Lorraine started talking. She talked about the house and about being reasonable, and about how none of this had to turn ugly, and she talked faster and faster, filling a silence that was supposed to be filled with my anger. There was no anger to fill it with. So her words went out into the concrete, and the hum and died there. Julian said they should go. He said it twice. They left without the scene they came for. That is the only thing I took out of that room, and I took it standing up. As they turned for the door, Lorraine reached for the handle, and I saw it plain. Her hand was shaking worse than mine ever had, as if she were the one afraid of what came next. A house gets a certain kind of quiet when someone has just carried half of it out the door, and the whole way home I kept thinking about her hands, not mine. The truck ran the way it always ran. The 1998 F-150 plate, LTC 4419, hesitates on the second turn of the key when the temperature drops under 30, and it hesitated that Tuesday evening, December 3, 2024, in the Northgate lot, with the sodium lights coming on over the dock. I let it warm. I set the paper cup in the drink holder, because there was nowhere else to put it, and the folded divorce papers rode in my chest pocket, against the carpenter pencil, and the black ballpoint thirds down, the way I have folded every page handed to me for 34 years. Kettering Street looked the same from the curb. That is the part nobody warns you about. The porch light was on because it is on a timer, and a timer does not care who lives there. Inside, I did what I do with a machine that has been worked on by somebody else. I walked it, the front room first. 2 hook marks in the plaster, and a pair of clean rectangles on the wall where the paint had not faded, one large, one small. 20 years of sunlight had gone around those frames instead of through them, and now the wall had a record of it. A wall keeps better records than a company does. The hallway. Nothing missing. Nothing worth taking. The bedroom. Her side of the closet had been emptied with care hangers, left facing the same direction, and the good gray wool coat gone off the hook by the door. She had taken the quilt and left the blanket. She had taken the mirror and left the nail. The kitchen. 4 chairs went out to the truck at some point that afternoon, and one came back or one never left. It stood by itself at the end of the table with its back to the window. The good lamp was gone from the shelf. She had wiped the shelf after she took it, which I thought about longer than I should have. I did not sit down. I set the empty cup on the shelf where the lamp had been, and it looked about as useful there as it had looked on the steel table with the bent corner, and I left it standing. Then I saw the mail on the carpet under the slot. Most of it was the usual. An electric bill, a flyer for tire rotation, and under those a certified letter-heavy stock, the corner bent, where it had come through the brass mouth and dropped. I opened it standing at the kitchen table with my coat still on. The letterhead was the kind that costs money to look plain. The body of it was 6 lines. I read the 4th line 3 times. I represent the estate of Silas Renner. I stopped moving. There is a particular stillness you learn in a plant when a compressor that has been running all shift goes quiet and you have not touched anything. You do not jump. You stand there and you listen for what changed. Silas Renner hired me when I was 24 years old, with no trade, no tools, and a work history you could read in under a minute. He was on the floor that day, not upstairs. He had a machinist's rule in his shirt pocket, and he asked me if I could hold a wrench square, and I said I could learn, and he said that was the correct answer. That was 34 years and 1 week ago, give or take. I had assumed for a long time that he had died somewhere far off and quiet, the way old men with money are supposed to die, and that nobody would have thought to tell a mechanic. The answering machine on the counter had a red light going. One message. I pressed it with a knuckle because my thumb was black from the packing gland I had repaired that morning. Mr. Doyle, my name is Nathaniel Frost. I represent the estate of Silas Renner. Silas, I said to the empty kitchen, the man who gave me my first job. He left instructions, the voice went on. Unhurried, not a salesman's voice, a voice that had said hard things to people for a living and had gotten good at spacing them out. Very specific ones. He named you. Named me for what? I asked. The machine only clicked off. I played it again and stood there in a coat I had not taken off. He's been dead a long time, I said to nobody. Or I've been wrong a long time. Then I did the thing that started all of it, and I did not know that was what I was doing. I took the divorce papers out of my chest pocket and unfolded them on the table thirds, coming open stiff, the way paper does when it has been carried warm. I laid the letter beside them, square edges parallel, because that is how you set 2 parts down when you intend to compare them. The divorce papers were dated November 27, 2024. The letter was signed by Nathaniel Frost on November 18, 2024. The postmark on the envelope read November 20, 9 days. 9 days before my wife's attorney put a date on the end of a 20-year marriage, a man I had never met had already sat down in an office somewhere and written my name on a piece of paper. I do not believe in signs. I believe in sequence. When 2 events show up in the wrong order, something upstream is feeding them, and you do not find it by staring at the gauge. You walk the line. I did not call anybody. Not Marcus. Not her. I folded the letter in thirds, put it in my pocket, and decided I would drive downtown myself in the morning and stand in front of whoever answered the door. Then I looked at the top of the page one more time. At the top of the letterhead under the lawyer's name sat the name of the parent company that owned it all, and it was the same name stamped on the payroll slip in my pocket, the company that owned the plant where I scraped frost off my sleeves every morning. The elevator climbed higher than I had ever ridden in a building I did not have keys to clean, and the whole way up I kept folding and unfolding a letter that already knew more about my life than I did. I had left the truck 2 blocks back in a parking garage that charged by the hour. The 1998 Ford F-100 diesel plate, LTC 4419, sat between a black sedan and a concrete post, with rust bleeding through the paint on my tailgate. The rate posted at the booth came to more per hour than the plant paid me to keep its compressors breathing. I paid it anyway. A man does not haggle on the morning he intends to ask a hard question. Thursday, December 5, 2024. Late morning, third day of a month I already did not trust. The 34th floor of 1400 Halden Avenue smelled like nothing. That was the first thing I noticed. Every room I had worked in for 34 years smelled like something ammonia-wet, cardboard, diesel, cold meat, the sharp mineral bite of frost coming off a coil. This place had glass on 2 walls and oak on the rest, and carpet so thick it ate my boots. I could see the whole city from up there. Rail Spur Road was a gray seam way out at the edge of it, under a smear of stack steam. 34 years of my life, and from here it looked like something you could cover with a thumb. A woman took my name and did not blink at my work jacket. Then a door opened, and a man came out with cufflinks and white hair and a face like a closed ledger. "Mr. Doyle," he said. "Nathaniel Frost. I handle estates and probate. I represented Mr. Renner for 26 of my 31 years in practice. You wrote me a letter." I did. He put me in a chair across a slab of oak. On the desk sat a 6-inch steel machinist rule, flat worn silver at the edges, holding down nothing at all. I knew that rule. I had seen it on an old man's desk when I was 24 years old, with grease under my nails, and no reason on God's earth to be hired. Beside it lay a file 2 inches thick. I kept my hands on my knees. "Silas Renner died on November 14th, 2024, Frost said. "He was 91. The instructions I am about to read were written years ago and reviewed twice. Nothing in them was decided in a hospital bed." "I didn't know he was dead," I said. "Nobody at the plant said a word." "No," he said. "They wouldn't have." He opened the file. He did not rush, and he did not soften it. 1,200,000,000, Frost said, and 71% of the voting shares. The room did not move. Neither did I. There is a thing that happens when a line lets go under pressure, when the gauge swings past every number it has and just sits there against the pin. You do not react to that. You go find the valve. "I fix compressors," I said. "I don't own towers. As of Mr. Renner's death, you own the tower you clock into." "Say that plainer." "Renner Group Holdings," he said. "The estate is the whole of what he left behind, and I administer it. The 71% is the block that carries control of the company." I asked the only question a mechanic asks first, because a machine is not a number, it is a list of parts. "What does it own?" He turned the page and read. "Real estate downtown, 2 logistics firms, a packing operation upstate, rail leases." Then 4 lines down in the same flat voice he had used for all of it. "Northgate Cold Storage, Rail Spur Road." I looked out at that gray seam under the steam, 28 degrees on the dock, 10 in the bays. My badge, my locker. The bent corner on the break room table. The vending machine that takes $2.75 and gives back a cup of coffee thin as dishwater. A place I had walked into 6 days a week since I was 24. Mine. And then the second thing came, and it came slower and colder than the first. Julian was director of operations. 9 years in that company, promoted 3 times, an overcoat he never let touch a rail. My stepson since he was 4 years old. He had spent a decade climbing a ladder, and the ladder was bolted to a floor I had just been handed the deed to, and he did not know it. Nobody in that building knew it. "And the divorce," I said. Frost did not hesitate. "An inheritance is separate property, Mr. Doyle. It belongs to one spouse alone and cannot be divided in a divorce. She signed away a house. She has no claim on this." Her lawyer dated the papers November 27th. "I signed your letter November 18," he said. The order of those dates is not an accident of the mail, but the law does not care what she knew. Separate property is separate property. So what am I on paper? As of November 14, you are the majority shareholder of Renner Group Holdings, holding 71% of the voting shares. I sat with that the way you sit with a diagnosis. Why me? I said. Why not family? Frost closed the folder halfway and looked at me for the first time like a man and not a file. I asked him that. Twice. He said family disappoints. Mechanics show up. He let it sit. He said you came in on Christmas of 1998 when a line froze and nobody called you. He kept a note of it. He never told me any of that. He had no one else, Frost said. One son disowned in 1989 and never named again. No wife living. 9 directors he paid and did not trust. He had 30 years of reports on his desk, and in every one of them, the same badge number kept the cold rooms from failing. He asked me once whether a man could be measured by what he repaired instead of what he owned. Frost squared the folder. He instructed me to leave it to the man who fixed his freezers and never sent him a bill for the trip. That is the whole of the reason, Mr. Doyle. He wrote it in one line and never revised it. I did not know what to do with my hands. I looked at the steel rule on his desk and thought about an old machinist who measured everything, including people, and never once said the number out loud. Then Frost picked up his pen and tapped it twice on the oak. There is one more page. He slid it across. It was not typed. It was handwriting cramped, hard-pressed, the letters of a man whose hands had gone bad. A short list of ledger items, each one marked with the same word in the margin. Abnormal. Every mark had been made in the last month of the old man's life. A man with $1 billion could burn it all down by lunch, and Silas's list was sitting on my kitchen table telling me exactly where to start the fire, so I laced up my work boots instead. Monday, December 9, 2024. Day 7. The dock at Northgate held at 28 degrees, and my breath came out under the sodium lights in short white rags. I was there at 10 minutes to 5 the way I had been for 34 years, because a compressor tells you the truth in the first minute after a long night and lies to you for the rest of the shift. Nothing about the last 6 days had changed the sound of the number 3 unit. Marcus Bell was at the time clock with his coat still zipped to the chin. 12 years in 41 years old, 2 girls at home, 7 and 11, and a folder in his locker with a copy of every form he had ever filed. You look like a man who slept in a chair, old man, he said. I slept fine. Sure. Bay 4's running warm again. I put in for it. They'll say no. They always say no. He laughed and there was nothing in it. I swiped in. Badge 0471, the same 4 digits since 1990, the same green light. Nobody looked up. That was the part I was counting on. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with one lamp on a laptop. I barely trusted a legal pad, and the handwritten page Frost had slid across his oak desk on December 5th. Silas's letters were cramped and pressed hard into the paper, a machinist's hand gone bad at the end. Ledger items down the left. One word in the margin beside each of them, abnormal. I drew a line down the middle of the legal pad with my black ballpoint and wrote 2 words at the top of each column. Fast. Slow. Fast was simple. 71% of the voting shares is not an opinion. As majority shareholder, I could call a meeting walk into 1400 Halden Avenue on a Tuesday morning, and by noon there would be a new board and a lot of people carrying boxes to the elevator. Slow was one line. Stay on the floor. The phone rang at 9. Frost never called late without a reason, and he never opened with weather. You could replace the whole board tomorrow, Frost said. Tomorrow they'd shred everything by noon, I said. So you'll stay on the floor. As what, the janitor who owns the place? As the man nobody watches, I said. That's how you catch people. And if it takes months, Frost said, then it takes months. I've been early to that gate for 34 years. I was quiet long enough that I heard him set something down. One condition, Mr. Doyle. Removal has to be for cause, and cause has to be documented. Then get me the documents, I said, and I'll get you the reason. I gave him the 3 reasons in order, because a man who taps his pen twice before bad news deserves the whole list. First, for cause. Removing an officer for cause means removing him for proven misconduct, not because the owner woke up unhappy. Anything less, and he walks out with a settlement, a clean record, and a lawyer of his own. Second, the plant. A public fight puts 140 jobs in the shredder next to the evidence, and the men on that dock have mortgages that do not care who is right. Third, and this was the one that decided it. The minute anyone in that building learns who I am, the documents stop existing. Paper is only evidence while nobody is afraid of it. Frost took that the way he took most things without agreeing out loud. An officer owes the company and its shareholders a fiduciary duty, he said. A legal obligation to put the company's interest ahead of his own. If those ledger items say what Mr. Renner believed they said, someone broke that duty in writing, and writing keeps. Then we let it keep, I said. There was a reason my name was on that will, and it wasn't Christmas of 1998. Winter of 2004. A supervisor whose name I have not said in 20 years put a safety log in front of me at the end of second shift and a folded envelope on top of it. $400 cash. All I had to do was sign that a pressure test had been run on a line that had never been touched. I said I fix what I am allowed to, and I am not allowed to fix a piece of paper. He took the envelope back. When I turned around, Silas Renner was standing in the doorway in his overcoat, and he had heard all of it. He never said one word about it. Not in 20 years. Some men measure you with a rule. Silas measured you with a doorway. The rest of that week ran on 2 shifts. Days on the floor gauges, gaskets a bad fan motor in the West Bay. Nights at the kitchen table until the lamp was the only light on Kettering Street. Frost opened the records to me a piece at a time using the only authority that does not require a speech, a majority shareholder asking to see what he owns. Saturday, December 14. The first quarter of maintenance payables came through. Sunday night, December 15th, I opened it. That week I had swiped badge 0471 into shift after shift, still the old mechanic to every clerk and every camera in the building, and the hidden owner of all of it. The first record I opened carried the name of a vendor I had never once seen on the floor in 34 years, and it had been paid more in a single quarter than my entire crew earned in a year. Numbers never lie on their own. Somebody has to teach them how, and for 2 weeks of night shifts, I sat with a vendor nobody had ever met and let the numbers tell me who the teacher was. Monday, December 23, 2024, day 21. The records room sits above the plant floor at the top of a steel stair, 1 tube light buzzing like a fly in a jar, banker boxes stacked 4 high along the wall, a folding chair that never sat right under me. Below the floor, the compressors ran all night steady, like something big breathing in its sleep. I have known that sound longer than I have known my wife. I brought a legal pad and the black ballpoint out of my chest pocket. On the top line, I wrote the name exactly the way the paperwork spelled it. Cascade Thermal Services, LLC. I drew a line under it. By the first week of January, 41 entries hung off that line. Silas Renner taught me the method in a machine shop when I was 24. He kept a list in his own hand on the back of a tally sheet, and he called it the abnormal list. Anything that did not behave the way a machine or a ledger ought to behave went on it. No explanation attached. A man who explains a thing too early, he said, stops seeing it. So I did not explain. I wrote, Cascade Thermal Services billed Northgate for coolant service on the ammonia system. That was the first abnormal, and it was a big one. I am the coolant service on the ammonia system. Me, Marcus Bell, and a second shift kid who still wears the wrong gloves. Invoice dated September 9, 2023. Purge and recharge freezer bays 2 and 3. 4-man crew 9 hours premium rate. On September 9, 2023, I did that purge alone in 5 hours and wrote it on the maintenance card in flat carpenter pencil, and the card was still in the box 8 feet from my chair. Every contractor who works this property signs in at the guard shack on Railspur Road. Name, company, plate, time in, time out. I read 18 months of gate logs across 4 nights. No Cascade crew ever signed in. Not one man. Not one truck. Not one date. Then the work orders got strange in a different direction. Quarterly service on a glycol chiller in the East Annex, billed on schedule, paid on schedule. There is no glycol loop in the East Annex. There is a block wall, a floor drain, and a pallet jack that has been broken since I had a full head of hair. I worked Christmas Eve, and I worked the 26th. Cold does not take holidays, and neither does paper. The building was quiet enough at 2 in the morning that I could hear the frost tick in the ductwork while I stacked another box on the table and started again. Monday, December 30. Frost called the records room phone at 11 at night, which told me he had been working as late as I had. Mr. Doyle, he said, and then he tapped his pen twice and I braced. He had followed the payments out of Northgate's accounts. They did not land at a service company. They landed in an account held by a shell entity, which is a business that exists as a name, a mailbox, and a bank line, and nothing else. It was formed 3 weeks before the first Cascade invoice. No crews, no yard, no history. Frost had checked contractor licensing, insurance filings, and the tax record, and Cascade Thermal Services had never held any of the 3. The contracts themselves were inflated maintenance agreements priced at 3 and 4 times the market. Total paid across 18 months, $4.6 million. That is not sloppy accounting, he said. Sloppy has a bottom. This has a design. He explained the 2 pieces of law I would need, and he explained them the way you explain a valve to a new man. Fiduciary duty is the legal obligation an officer owes the company and its shareholders to put their money ahead of his own pocket. And if a name could be tied to the approvals, an officer could be removed for cause, which means removal for proven misconduct, not at the pleasure of a board, not a resignation, not a package. I wrote both terms on the legal pad and underlined them once. Then I did the other arithmetic, the kind that does not appear in any ledger. $4.6 million measured in gaskets, in gauges, in scrubbers, in respirators, in every repair, this plant had been told it could not afford while men worked in 10-degree air. Thursday, January 2. I went looking for the human end of it. Paper tells you what happened. It never tells you who walked in the door. Marcus was at the coffee machine on break, blowing on his hands. You remember who pushed the new coolant vendor? I asked Marcus. Some suit, he said. Never got his hands cold. You catch a name, Voss Marcus said. Acted like he already owned us. Did he now? I said, keeping my face flat. You know him, old man. I knew a Voss, once, I said. Bought him a bike when he was 9. Marcus laughed the way he laughs when the company comes up, no joy anywhere in it, and said the man had said his own name like it was a brand on a truck. Then he went back to the bays. I did not tell him one word of what was in those boxes. Whatever this turned into, it was not going to land on a man with 2 daughters and a locker full of forms. Sunday, January 5, day 34. I pulled the largest contract in the file, the master maintenance agreement renewed twice without a single competing bid, and turned to the last page. Approval block. 1 line for a signature, one for the printed name. I did not need the printed line. It was Julian's signature, that same confident loop, with the long tail on the J, exactly the way a 4-year-old had learned to write his name at my kitchen table. Some crimes wear a suit, and I had that man's signature in my pocket now, but the one that turned my stomach were a stack of rejected requisition forms. Monday, January 6, day 35. I clocked in at 4:40 in the morning, with that contract folded in thirds against my chest, and I said nothing about it to anybody. The plant runs on paper the way it runs on ammonia. Requests go up, approvals come down, and a man on the floor learns to read the weather from what never comes back. Capital requests live in the maintenance office in a green binder. Nobody guards because nobody upstairs believes a mechanic reads. I took it into the shop with my coffee and went through 4 budget cycles the way I would go through a compressor, 1 stage at a time. Marcus Bell had filed for ammonia scrubbers and full-face respirators. He had filed for them 4 times. 4 times the answer came back with the same 2 words typed into the disposition line. Budget constraints. I copied the 4 denial dates onto the back of a parts tag with the flat carpenter pencil I keep in my chest pocket. Then I set that tag beside the payment schedule I had pulled in the records room on night shift. The one that moved $4.6 million to Cascade Thermal Services, LLC, across 18 months. The dates interlocked like gear teeth. Every time the company told Marcus there was no money for scrubbers, there was money that same month for a vendor with no crews, no yard, and no history. It was not a shortage. It was a transfer. A few $100s of breathing equipment turned down so an invoice could clear for $40,000. An officer of a company owes that company and its shareholders what the lawyers call fiduciary duty, which in plain speech means the money is not his to spend on himself. I had first heard the phrase downtown in December, sitting in a chair worth more than my truck. In a cold shop on Railspur Road, it stopped being a phrase. Thursday, January 9, day 38. I walked into the ammonia hall on the back half of second shift where the night crew, 4 men who spend every working night of their lives in that room, were changing out a suction valve under a work light. You can read a machine 2 ways. You can read the gauge which tells you what the machine is willing to admit, or you can lay your hand on the line and listen, which tells you the truth. Nobody upstairs had put a hand on that line in a year. I heard it from the door. The header pipe ticked where it should have been silent. Not a knock. A tick, the sound steel, makes carrying stress it was not built to carry, and under it a thin hiss at a flange like steam 3 rooms away. I followed the run to the inspection tag wired to the shutoff. The service interval had come and gone. The last date written on that tag belonged to a year that was over. Marcus came in pulling his hood back and stood beside me looking at it. 4 times I filed for the new scrubbers, Marcus said. 4 times denied. Who signed the NOBUD corporate? Budget's tight. He laughed without joy. It wasn't tight, I said. It was stolen 1 rejected form at a time. You say that like you can prove it. I say it like a man who can read a gauge, I said. Then read this one, Marcus said, and put his hand flat on the line, and we both felt it ticking. He told me the scrubbers were not a luxury. A scrubber takes a vent of ammonia and washes it down into water before it can find a man's lungs. Full-face respirators are what a crew wears when it cannot get out. Without either one, the plan is to run, and running is not a plan. It is a hope with a stopwatch on it. There's a federal outfit, OSHA, he said. Workplace safety. A man can file with them. Then file, I said. I got 2 girls, old man, 7 and 11. You file with OSHA, and the company goes looking for a reason. They call it for cause, which is supposed to mean they proved you did something. They don't have to prove it. They just have to type it. I let that sit and drank my coffee cold. I did not tell him that the man who could stop it was standing right there in front of him, holding a paper cup. Sunday, January 19, day 48. The file store behind the maintenance shop is a room with a bad bulb and dust that stands in the air. Instead of settling boxes, going back 15 years, a lock broken since before Marcus was hired. I went in looking for older requisitions. I came out with incident reports. The one for the night of October 17, 2024. Freezer Bay 4 had been worked over, whited and retyped. The paper was thicker under my thumb where the correction fluid had dried, and the new type sat a half line high, the way a page does when it goes back into a machine a second time. I pulled the safety log for that shift. On a live ammonia system, that log gets an entry every 20 minutes all night, every night in ink. From 11:40 to 1:40, there was nothing at all. Then the entries picked up again, as if the night had been ordinary. Sloppy paperwork is one man in a hurry. Deliberate paperwork is 2 documents that agree with each other. I laid the altered report beside the log, and the hole in one matched the hole in the other, minute for minute. Somebody had erased what happened in the cold on a night in October, and right at the edge of the smudge where the typing had been lifted off the page was Marcus's name. I found out what really happened that October night. The hardest way possible, standing under the same alarm, watching it start happening again. It was Friday, January 24, 2025, 11:40 at night. I was on my back under the number 3 compressor with a wrench in my hand when the pitch changed. Machines talk. After 34 years, you stop hearing them the way other men do and start hearing them the way a doctor hears a chest. That line went from a hum to a whistle to a sound like a sheet of tin tearing lengthwise. Then the horn. An ammonia alarm in a cold storage plant is not a bell. It is a flat blast that sits down on top of your thinking and stays there. The lights over the ammonia hall went to strobe white and hard, and the vapor came out of Freezer Bay 4 low along the floor, rolling. The way fog comes off a river in November, except fog does not eat the inside of your throat. 4 men from the night crew came past me heading for the dock. Doors, coats open, one of them without a hat, all of them doing exactly what the placard on the wall tells a man to do. I put a hand out and stopped the last one. "Who's in the bay?" I said. He shook his head and kept moving. The horn made the answer for him. Somebody's tools were still ringing against steel in there. 3 strikes, 4, then nothing. Marcus had the bay that night. He had told me at shift change, laughing that laugh he has when the company comes up, the one with nothing in it. "Bay 4 again, old man." Same line. The taste of metal was already in my mouth. Ammonia does that before it does anything else. It lays a penny on your tongue, and then it takes your air. There was 1 full-face respirator in that building. Not 4. Not the 8 Marcus had asked for on 4 separate requisitions across 4 budget cycles. Ammonia scrubbers and full-face units refused every time in the same corporate hand. 1. An obsolete spare in a green steel cabinet by the compressor room, out of service and out of date, kept there because I was the man who wrote the order that was refused, and I was not going to work a live ammonia system with nothing at all. I knew where it was because I had put it there. The cabinet hinge was stiff with frost. I broke it open with the wrench. The inspection tag on the bay door had not been renewed. I saw it going past a card in a plastic sleeve with a date on it that had gone by, and I remember thinking a man could die of a piece of cardboard. Inside, the world went white. The vapor stood chest high in the middle and lower at the walls, and the frost on the racks had turned gray. My left knee, the bad one since the fall in 2009, took the first 10 feet and complained about the rest. I worked along the base of the line because that is where a man works, and that is where a man drops. I was face down under the header, one arm folded wrong beneath him, his glove off, 41 years old, 12 years in the plant, 2 girls, 7 and 11. I got him under the arms and turned him, and his eyes were open and moving, which was the only good news in the room. Stay with me, Marcus. Can't breathe. You can. Eyes on me. He weighed what a grown man weighs. I dragged him 22 feet to the door and 11 more onto the dock, and the outside cold felt clean, which tells you what the inside was. Then red and blue lights in the dock doorway, men in bunker gear going the other way, with meters in their hands, oxygen, somebody cutting his sleeve open with shears. Under the ambulance lights, he got a fist in my sleeve and would not let go. They knew Walt. They knew and let it ride. I know, I said. And they're going to answer for all of it. You can't fight corporate, he said. Nobody can. I'm not going to fight them, I said. I'm going to own them. He thought that was the shock talking, and I let him think it. I stood in the wash of those lights, with a blanket on my shoulders. I had not asked for and listened to the crew talk the way men talk when their hands are still going. It happened in October. Same bay, same line, a man walked out to a car and driven to the hospital by his own shift, and no report of it ever came back down to the floor. 2 hours of a safety log gone. An incident report whited out and typed a second time. It was never about sloppiness, and it was never really about paper. A recorded ammonia release brings OSHA into the building, and OSHA brings corrective spending. And corrective spending is a number sitting on somebody's operations budget. The scrubbers were refused because the repair money was already spoken for. It was going out the door in monthly payments to a maintenance company with no crews, no yard, and no history. Marcus nearly died in October, so a line item would stay clean. He nearly died in January because it worked the first time. Officers are removed for cause when they do a thing like that. I intended to be the man holding the reason. At 4 in the morning, with my coat still smelling like the bay, I went back to the file store and pulled the October folder apart down to the last sheet. Under the layers of the buried file was a memorandum signed in that same looping hand, and beside Julian's signature, somebody had written a name from 30 years ago that I had never heard in my life. A name I had never heard had been quietly haunting a company I now secretly owned, and it took me 2 weeks in a basement archive to understand that somebody else was hunting the same name I was. On Monday, February 3, 2025, day 63 of the clock I had been keeping since December, I finished the night shift, washed the ammonia off my hands, and drove the F-150 downtown with the heater rattling. The corporate archive of Renner Group Holdings sits 2 levels under the lobby at 400 Halden Avenue. A man in coveralls with a badge that says maintenance can go almost anywhere in a building if he walks like he has been sent for. The archive smelled like toner and old paper and the dry heat that comes off fluorescent ballasts. Gray cabinets in rows. A reading room with 4 tables and a clock that ran 90 seconds fast. You filled out a request slip, printed the file number signed, and handed it through a slot to a clerk who never once looked up at me. I signed maintenance on every slip that first week, and nobody asked why maintenance wanted paper instead of parts. On the wall by the door hung the founder photographs, Silas Renner, across 52 years, a machinist in 1972, with his sleeves rolled, an old man in 2019 who had stopped bothering to smile. 11 frames hung level. The 12th hung crooked, and the dust on the hook behind it had been wiped in a half circle, the way a frame moves when somebody lifts it off and puts it back in a hurry. The files came up wrong, too. I had pulled 3 boxes of vendor records for the Cascade Thermal Services work, and in every box the folders sat out of sequence, 1988, in front of 1986 tabs, bent backward. Somebody had gone through them fast, and refiled them faster. The request slips clipped inside the box lids went back years, initials only a hand I did not need to study twice. It looped. It had a long tail on the letter that started it. By Thursday, February 6, I stopped looking at vendors and started looking at what he had looked at. The pattern came clear, the way a bad bearing does not all at once just the same noise in the same place every time around. He had never once pulled a financial record. He had pulled the founder's file. A corporate biography of Silas, printed for the 40th anniversary, annotated in soft pencil down the margins. Not the passages about the plant or the expansion. The passages about the house on Aldous Street, the marriage, the years between 1985 and 1991. Whoever it was had underlined the word family twice and put a question mark beside it. The next week I stopped asking for company paper and asked for personnel and estate records instead, the old ones, the ones that get boxed when a man dies and nobody reads again. On Wednesday, February 12th, the clerk brought up a thin folder with a Renner family record inside, typed, updated by hand across 4 decades. Wife. Parents. 1 line under them for issue. The line had been struck through with a ruler straight and deliberate in ink that had gone brown. No name. No dates. Just a groove in the paper where somebody had pressed hard enough to mean it. I saw Julian twice that week, both times at a distance, both times through glass. Once at the elevator bank with his overcoat still buttoned and his gloves still on. Once standing in the archive corridor, talking to the clerk, smiling before he said whatever he said. He did not see me. I was a man in coveralls, and to him that is furniture. On Friday, February 14th, I went up to the 34th floor and put it to Frost straight. Did Silas have children, I asked. One son, Frost said. Disowned. Erased from the record 30 years ago. Erased where? He took that to his grave. Why? Because somebody in this building is digging for the exact same man I am. Mr. Doyle, Frost said carefully, who else is asking? The man whose signature is on everything else in this file, I said. Frost tapped his pen twice on the desk and did not answer for a while. Then he said that when a family cuts a line out of its own record, the paper follows that adoption files and name changes get sealed by order, and that even the probate court will not open a sealed record for curiosity. He said the estate had been settled clean because Silas left no living issue of record. He said that phrase twice, of record, and let it sit there. 31 years in practice teaches a man how to tell you something by refusing to say it. I went back down to the archive on Saturday, February 15th, and worked until the clerk turned the lights off in the far row. In the last box, clipped inside the back cover of a folder of hospital and charitable donation records, I found 4 pages of pencil notes in that looping hand. They were not notes about a company. They were dates. County hospitals in 3 states with the years beside them. A list of surnames tried and crossed out. A line reading name change filed, no county listed. And down the right margin, a column of years written one under another, 1985 through 1992, each with a check mark or a slash beside it, the way a man works a punch list until the fault is found. I sat with my thumb on the paper and understood what I was holding. It was not an audit. It was a search for a berth. 9 years ago, a young man had taken a job in this company, and every promotion since had moved him closer to the room where the founder's private paper was kept, and he had not been climbing toward money. He had been climbing toward a name. On the last page, 1 year was circled twice and underlined, and it was the year Julian was born. The warning had come a week before any of it started, and I had been too worn down to listen. But a circled year on a stolen page put that old woman's voice right back in my ear. I sat in the truck outside my own house on the morning of Tuesday, February 18th, 2025, with the 4 penciled pages folded in thirds in my chest pocket, and the memory came up out of me the way a bearing lets go all at once with no warning noise before it. Thanksgiving Thursday, November 28, 2024. 9 people around a table built for 6. A television going in the back room, men shouting about a fumble nobody had seen clearly. Gravy going cold in a chipped white boat. Julian at the far end with his sleeves buttoned, cutting turkey like it owed him money. And Della's hand closing on my forearm, dry and light, as a folded pattern, her mouth close to my ear, while everyone else argued about the officiating. "Watch the boy," she said. "He is not who Lorraine says he is." I had patted her hand and said something kind and meaningless, and I had gone back to my plate. An old woman's nerves. 79 years and a lifetime of watching a family disappoint her. 5 days later, I sat at a steel table with a bent corner and learned what a man is worth to the people who eat his food. I drove to Bell Street. Her block had not changed in the 20 years I had been driving onto it. Small houses set close, chain link, a fire hydrant. Somebody had painted silver in a better decade. Her walk was swept. It is always swept. A woman who spent 46 years bent over a sewing machine does not tolerate a crooked line anywhere she can reach. She opened the door before I knocked. I sat down on the step and unlaced my boots and set them side by side on the mat, the way I have done at that door since 2005. Because she keeps a cream carpet, and because the plant follows a man home in his soles. She watched me do it and said nothing, and something in her face told me she had been expecting the sound of that particular truck for a while. Her front room was warm and close. Plastic still on the good chair. A hat box up on the top shelf of the hall closet. The door standing open an inch, which was not how she kept it. She put water on and brought out 2 cups of tea, and neither one of us touched them the whole time. They sat there and went cold and made rings on the coasters she had cut herself out of cork. She asked about the papers first, whether they were final, whether I had a place. I told her I had a house, which was not the same as an answer, and she let me have it. Then she asked about Lorraine, and she asked it wrong. Not how is she? Not is she sorry? She said, is she taking care of herself? Walter, and she said it with her eyes down on her own hands, and her hands were measuring the air, the way they do, thumb to finger sizing something she could not see. There was a whole other room behind that question, and she was standing in the doorway of it, keeping the door mostly shut. I let it pass. I am not proud of that. I had come for one thing, and a man who is chasing one fault does not stop to chase a second. You tried to warn me at the table, I said. I've tried for years, Della said. Lorraine begged me to stay quiet. Quiet about what? About who really fathered that boy, Della said, and about the family that father came from. Say the name. She looked at the window a long time. Out on Bell Street, a car went by with a bad belt squealing, and I sat in a warm little room in my socks and waited on a 79-year-old woman the way you wait on a compressor coming up to pressure, because pushing it does not make it faster and can break something. You already know it, Walter, or you wouldn't be sitting in my house with your boots off. I need to hear it out loud, I said. She told me she had carried it since 1990. 35 years. She said Lorraine came to her that spring before anybody knew and cried on that same good chair when the plastic was new and made her swear. Della had sworn. She had gone to this christening and the birthdays and the graduation, and she had watched a man she liked marry into it in 2005 and raise a 4-year-old boy who was not his, and she had kept her word every single day of it. I am tired, she said. I have kept it so long it has taken the shape of my hands. Pretty is what got us all here, and I have been holding the pins in my mouth for 35 years, so nobody would see the seam. She did not tell me everything. I want that understood. She did not tell me where the man went, or what he became, or what was in the hat box on that shelf, and I did not ask her that day. She had one thing left in her, and she spent it careful the way you spend the last of anything. She said the boy's father had a name he was born with, and a name he took, and that the one he took was Voss. I asked her for the one he was born with. Her chin came up and her hands went still in her lap, for the first time since I had walked in, and she said it barely above the sound of the kettle cooling on the stove. And it was the same 6 letters penciled and crossed and penciled again down the margin of 4 stolen pages in my chest pocket. Renner, she whispered, and the little room tilted under my feet like a floor I had walked on for 34 years and never once thought to test. Before I tell you what that name meant, do one thing for me, comment. The number 34 years I gave that plant, so I know you're still here with me. And please note the story ahead contains some fictional elements and may not unfold exactly as it happened. If that isn't for you, you're free to step away right here. Some secrets do not shatter. They erode one careful lie at a time, until the truth is just a shape under the dust. And that week, Della and I finally brushed the dust off. Monday, February 24, 2025, day 84. I parked the truck 2 houses down on Bell Street at 9 in the morning and carried a paper sack of coffee up the walk. 5 days I had sat with that whispered name. 5 days of turning it the way you turn a cracked fitting in your hand, looking for the hairline. Della opened the door before I got to the second step, which told me she had been waiting since Tuesday for a man to come back and finish what he started. The hat box was already down off the shelf. It sat on the low table in front of the good chair, the one with plastic still on it. Lid off the letters inside, standing on edge like index cards in a shop drawer. She had sorted them. Of course she had. A woman who spent 46 years cutting cloth does not hand a man a pile. Stand if you want, she said. You will anyway. I stood. She passed them to me one at a time, in order the way you feed stock into a machine that only runs one direction. The paper had gone soft at the folds. The ink had gone brown where it had been blue. The first was dated the fall of 1989. A young man's hard pressure on the downstrokes. He wrote that his father had cut him off in a single afternoon in an office without raising his voice, and that a lawyer had walked him to the elevator. He wrote that the old man told him he would not carry the name any further. 6 weeks later, there was another letter, and the signature at the bottom had changed. Peter Renner had become Peter Voss. He took the name the way a man takes a bus out of town. Then the other hand came in, and I knew that one. I have seen it on grocery lists and Christmas cards for 20 years. Lorraine wrote to him through 1989 and into the spring of 1990, and the letters got shorter as they went the way they do. The last one was April. Julian was born in June 1990. I did not sit down. My knee was talking to me, and I stood anyway because sitting would have made it a conversation, and I wanted it to stay a job. So Julian is Silas's grandson, I said. By blood, Della said. Never by knowing. Silas died not knowing the boy breathed. Then why hide it all these years? Because Silas hated Peter. Naming the boy would have bought shame, not a share, Della said. Lorraine was saving it for a better day. And the day never came, I said. The day came, Della said. It just came for you instead of him. She told me she had learned it in 1994, sitting in that same room, and that Lorraine had made her swear on the hatbox lid. 30 years of silence, she called it, and she said it plain, the way you read a measurement off a tape. She said, a woman with a baby and no money does not walk up to a man like Silas Renner holding a birth certificate. She said Lorraine had looked at that secret every year, the way you look at a good coat you are keeping for a wedding that never gets scheduled, until the moths get to it and the wedding is somebody else's. I took 3 of the letters. Della let me. I folded them in thirds and put them in my chest pocket alongside the ballpoint. Friday, February 28, 2025, day 88 at 10 in the morning. I laid the same 3 letters on the conference table on the 34th floor of 1400 Halden Avenue, where the oak is the color of dark honey and the carpet eats every sound a man makes coming in. Frost had already sent for a certified copy of the Renner family record from the county, and it was waiting under glass-clear plastic at his elbow. And there it was. One line struck through with a single ruled stroke. Not scratched out. Ruled. A man with a straightedge had ended his son. Frost does not believe things. He verifies them. He put the 1989 letter beside the record and read the 2 of them the way I read a compressor log looking for the line that lies. He checked the postmark against the date. He checked the changed signature against the amended surname. He tapped nothing yet, which is how I knew he was not finished. The letters are consistent with the record, Mr. Doyle, he said at last. Peter Renner, disowned in 1989, took the surname Voss. Your stepson is the biological grandson of Mr. Renner. That is a fact of blood. Which makes him what? I said. A relative, Frost said. Nothing more. Understand me plainly, because this is the whole of it. A valid will admitted by the probate court governs the estate. Blood does not override a document. A grandson may be a grandson in every church in this state and still take nothing, because Mr. Renner directed his estate elsewhere, and the voting shares came to you, and an inheritance is separate property, which means it is yours alone and not marital money to be split. Blood does not defeat a valid will. Remember that, because he will learn it too. I looked at that ruled line for a while. Everything I was carrying, the 71%, the estate, the whole cold weight of it, sat on top of a bloodline somebody buried in a hatbox in 1994. Julian had a legitimate grievance. He had a grandfather. He was never shown, and a name he never got offered. He also had no claim. I said so out loud because a thing like that ought to be said in a room with a witness in it. Blood alone cannot beat a will, Frost said, tapping his pen twice, which means if a man wanted to beat one, he would first have to make a piece of paper that has no business existing. For one long night, I let myself wonder whether I had been handed something that was never mine to hold, and Frost's sentence about blood kept sitting at my kitchen table like a guest who would not leave. It was Friday, February 28, 2025, day 88 of a thing. I had started counting whether I wanted to or not. I got back to Kettering Street a little before 9, and the house met me the way it had been meeting me all winter, which is to say, it didn't. One chair at the table, one lamp with a shade that had gone the color of weak tea. On the shelf above the counter, the empty paper cup standing there like a tool I hadn't decided how to use yet. And on the table, laid square with the edge, the way a man lays out a thing, he respects the 6-inch steel rule Frost had put in my hand in his office because it had sat on Silas Renner's desk for 52 years, And Frost said, "An estate is only paperwork until somebody carries a piece of it home." I made coffee at 11. Black, no sugar, the same as always. I drank it at midnight and made more at 1. Here is the argument I had with myself, and I'll give it honest. Because a man who cheats in his own kitchen will cheat anywhere. The boy had the blood. Not the boy, the man, 34 years old. A charcoal overcoat. He never got dirty, and gloves. He never took off on my plant floor, but I had known him at 4, and the arithmetic of a face doesn't change just because you learn what's behind it. Julian was Silas Renner's grandson. Nobody ever told him. Nobody told Silas either, and Silas died on November 14th of last year with a struck-through line in a family record and a son he hadn't named out loud since 1989. That's an open wound. It sat on a shelf in a hat box on Bell Street for 30 years, while the man who could have healed it went to work every day 9 miles away. Against that I had myself. 58 years old. A bad left knee since the fall in 2009. 34 years of pulling compressors apart and putting them back so that other men's freight stayed frozen. A carpenter pencil and a black ballpoint in my shirt pocket. And the 71% block of voting shares that made me the majority shareholder of Renner Group Holdings, which is a sentence I still could not say inside my own house without feeling like I was lying. Grease under the nails does not make a man righteous. I know plenty of men on that dock who'd have taken the money and never looked at the safety logs once. Maybe the difference between me and Julian was luck. Maybe I'd just never been offered a bribe large enough to find out what I was. At 2 in the morning, I picked up the phone and called Frost at an hour lawyers do not answer. He answered on the 3rd ring, dry as chalk, like he'd been sitting up waiting for exactly this. "He has the blood," I told Frost. "Maybe it should go to him." Silas didn't leave it to blood. He left it to the man who never once lied to him. That doesn't feel like enough to earn $1 billion. It was enough for Silas, Frost said. The only question left is whether it's enough for you. And if I hand it over, I said, then the scrubbers stay unbought and the log stays erased, Frost said. Charity is not the same as justice, Mr. Doyle. No, I said, it isn't. He let that sit a moment. Then he said the Cascade Thermal Services file was nearly closed on his end, that the last of the routing was reconciled, and that a man does not get removed from an office for cause on a feeling, he gets removed on documents. Then he hung up because Frost has never in his life said goodbye when the business was finished. I sat with the steel rule and remembered the only thing worth remembering. 1991. Compressor 3 on the west wall, a noise in the bearing like a spoon in a can. Silas came down in a good coat and asked what it needed. I told him a rebuild, 11 days, and the number. The floor boss behind him said we could run it till spring. I said we couldn't. Silas looked at me a while. Then he took the 6-inch rule out of his pocket and put it in my hand and said, "Keep it." He said, "Every man in this building tells me what a repair costs. You're the only one who tells me what it costs to not make it. Family disappoints," he said. Mechanics show up. That was it. That's the whole inheritance, and the money is just the receipt. Blood is an accident. Nobody earns it, nobody chooses it, and it does not hold under load. Trust is work. It gets built the way anything gets built, one honest hour at a time, and it can be spent by a man in gloves who signs approvals he shouldn't, and lets a bay vent on October 17th, and lets 4 requisitions die across 4 budget cycles. So I decided at maybe 3:30 with the cup on the shelf and the rule on the table. I would not be bullied by a bloodline, and I would not be softened by guilt. I'd let the truth decide who kept what. If the truth said I was the wrong, I'd hand it over gladly. If it said Julian was, then it would have to say so on paper in daylight, and not 1 hour before. I slept 90 minutes, laced my boots tight, and drove the F-150 out Railspur Road in the dark. At 4:50 on the morning of Saturday, March 1st, I drove in for the morning shift, and the card reader blinked red twice and stayed shut. Badge 0471, 34 years, denied, and somebody 34 floors up had done that on purpose. One phone call would have ended him that morning. I owned 71% of the company that printed the card in my hand, and I stood in the dark in front of a red light and did not make it. A man removed without cause comes back with a lawyer, a settlement, and a clean record, and the 4 denied requisitions stay buried with him. So I waited in the cold like a man who had been sent away, because the only version of this that holds up is the one built out of paper. They reactivated my badge on the 3rd try. And 2 days later, the man who had switched it off came down to the cold floor himself, and this time he came hunting. Monday, March 3, I stood at the card reader at 4:50 in the morning and watched it blink red a 4th time. It took a shift supervisor with a clipboard and 2 phone calls upstairs before the light went green. A clerical error, they called it. 34 years and badge 0471 had become a clerical error. I went inside and changed the seals on a compressor and said nothing about it to anybody. Wednesday, March 5, they pulled the whole shift into the shipping bay at the turn between 1st and 2nd, 60 of us standing between 300 pallets, with our breath hanging in the air. The dock holds at 28 degrees. You can stand in it if you keep moving. 60 men and women stood still in it for 11 minutes because a man in an overcoat told them to. He came in through the personnel door with his gloves on. He never takes them off down here. 9 years with the company, 3 promotions, director of operations, and he has never once put a bare hand on cold steel. That was Julian. I raised him from the time he was 4 years old, taught him to tie a bowline and change a tire, and he stepped up onto the edge of the dock plate and looked out over the crew like a man counting inventory. He smiled first. He always smiles first. "I want to talk about integrity," he said. He talked for 6 minutes. He said that an officer of this company carries a fiduciary duty, which he explained for us kindly, the way you'd explain a hammer, a legal obligation to act in the interest of the company and the people who own it. He said that duty ran downhill too. He said the word family once, and I watched frost form on the sleeve of my coat. Then he got to what he'd come for. "Somebody's been in files they've got no business touching," Julian announced. He watched faces while he said it. That's what the whole 11 minutes was for. Not the speech. The faces. A man who has moved $4.6 million through a vendor with no crews and no yard doesn't come down to a 28-degree dock in March to discuss integrity. He comes down because he has smelled the audit and he wants to see who blinks. Nobody blinked. 60 people who load freight for a living know how to keep their faces flat. "Maybe somebody should have kept cleaner books," Marcus muttered. It carried. Cold air carries. Somebody near the strapping machine laughed, and then the bay was very quiet. Marcus was back on light duty since the January leak, and he wheezed now on the intake of every breath, which he never did in December. He'd filed 4 requisitions for scrubbers and full-face respirators across 4 budget cycles, and watched all 4 come back denied. Somewhere in the back, a man said, October 17th, low to the man beside him. That date lives in this building now. Julian marked him. I saw it happen. He looked at Marcus the way you look at a serial number you intend to write down. Then he did the smart thing, which was not to answer Marcus at all. He rounded on me instead. "You, maintenance. You see anything down here?" "I see a lot of broken things," I said. "I fix what I'm allowed to." "Then fix your mouth," Julian said, "before I fix your paycheck." Yes, sir, I said, and I meant it so quietly that two men behind me stopped smiling. 34 years, he said, and you still can't afford a coat. Coats don't keep the cold out, I said. Work does. He held it a second longer, testing the way a man leans on a lock to see if the bolt is seated. Then he stepped down off the dock plate and told the supervisor to get the freight moving. I stood there and took it in front of 60 people. It wasn't patience, and it wasn't turning a cheek. Frost had told me on the telephone that the file needed 2 more weeks. The vendor records the routing on the invoices, the signature comparisons, the safety log with its 2-hour hole in it. 2 weeks. And the minute I stopped looking like a mechanic, the shredders would start running on the 34th floor, and there would be nothing left to look at. A machine that's about to fail will tell you if you let it run. You don't shut it down early just to prove you heard it, so I let it run. Friday, March 14. At the end of second shift, there was a sheet of paper taped to the wall beside the time clock. Operational restructuring. Positions under review. That's the language they use when they mean names. 14 names printed in a column, and mine was 9th, and Marcus Bell was 11th. Underneath it said that all listed positions were subject to review, and that employment could be terminated for cause, which means for proven misconduct, not simply because a man in an office wants you gone. He'd have to prove something. He'd have to write it down. Men lined up behind me to punch out, and nobody said anything. I stood in a coat with frost on the sleeves and read it twice, and I did not say a word. At the bottom under the printed names was a memorandum line addressed to the HR office, and there in his own hand, in that looping script with the long tail on the J, he had added, especially the old one he knows too much. I was standing between me and my truck when I came off second shift, and he looked at me the way you would look at a stranger blocking a doorway you meant to walk through. Wednesday, March 19th, 2025. 11:20 at night. 6 days since his handwriting went up on the wall beside the time clock. The dock was empty. One sodium lamp burning orange over the concrete. A trailer sitting half-loaded at Bay 2 with the strapping still slack cold, coming up through the slab the way it does in March, when the ground gives its heat away all day and has none left by dark. My truck sat 20 feet behind him, the 1998 Ford F-150 plate, LTC 4499, one headlight, aimed a little low since I put the bumper into a curb. I had the keys in my hand. He had the gloves on. He always has the gloves on. He had picked his spot too. Men do that without knowing they do it, but he knew. He was standing where the lamp came down clean on his shoulders, so the overcoat read charcoal instead of black, and the shine on his shoes had somewhere to go. I came out of the dark end, where the compressors run in a coat with frost still melting off the sleeves, smelling like machine oil and cold meat. Long night maintenance, he said. They're all about the same length. He smiled first. He does that. The smile comes out ahead of the sentence like a man sending a dog in before he walks into a yard. You read the list. I read it. You didn't come to HR. 14 men on that sheet and 11 of them found a reason to be in that office by Monday. Not you. He tipped his head. I thought you'd want to plead your case. I don't have a case, I said. I have a job. I came in and did it Monday, Tuesday, and today. That's the thing about you. He let his breath go and watched it come apart in the light. You think showing up is the same as mattering. I didn't answer that. Behind him, the trailer ticked as its metal shrank. A man learns to let a quiet sit until whoever needs it fills it, and he needed it. You know what I remember about you, he said. Nothing. That's not cruelty, it's just true. I remember a truck in the driveway. I remember a man at the table with grease under his nails, not saying much. You were furniture in a house I lived in. All right. You were never my father, Julian said. I fixed your bike, your grades, your bloody nose. Felt like fathering to me. That landed somewhere. I watched it go in, and I watched him decide it hadn't. A bike, he said. A Huffy with a bent rear rim. You were 9. You rode it into the Kellerman's fence and came home crying with the chain off. I trued that rim on the kitchen floor with a spoke wrench and a piece of chalk while you held the seat. I shifted the keys to my other hand. You wrote your name for the first time at that same table. Big J with a tail on it. You've still got the tail. His jaw moved once under the skin, the way a relay clicks inside a panel before anything visible happens. You're a mechanic, he said. You never owned a thing in your life. Maybe not, I said. But I never once took what wasn't mine. Cold does a thing to sound out on that dock. It flattens it. The sentence went out and didn't echo, and he stood in it for a second longer than he wanted to. That, Julian said quietly, is where you and I are different. I thought about the black ballpoint in my chest pocket, and what I had signed with it, and how 20 feet of concrete and one word stood between him and the rest of his life. I felt something come up in me that was almost tenderness, and it wanted to tell him, so he could sit down somewhere warm and be scared in private with a chance to fix it. I let it go by. You don't shut a machine down early just to prove you heard it. You think something's owed to you, I said. Something is owed to me. He said it flat without the smile, and that was the first honest sentence he had ever said to me. You wouldn't understand what it's worth. Try me, I said. And for a second, 1 second, he almost did. His mouth opened a 1/4 inch. His weight came forward off his heels. Whatever it was, it had been sitting in him a long time, and it was heavy, and it wanted out, and there was nobody on that dock but a 58-year-old man in a frosted coat who could not possibly matter. Then it shut, because saying it out loud to me would have been like reading a will to a dog, and because some part of him knew it wasn't safe yet, and I watched him weigh those two things and choose silence, which is exactly what I would have done. Get your things in order, he said instead. 34 years is a long time. It'd be a shame to end it for cause. For a breath, I wanted to hand it to him the other way, sharp end first, just to see the light go out of that overcoat. Son, I wanted to say, count the shares. I kept my mouth shut. I fix what I am allowed to. Good night, Julian, I said, and I stepped around him, and he let me because a man does not brace against furniture. He walked off toward the row where the good cars parked, gloves flexing heels loud on the concrete, and about halfway there he said a name under his breath. The way a man tastes something. He is not sure he is allowed to eat yet. Renner, and he did not say it loud enough to be a claim. Julian had finally tasted the name out loud. So I drove to Bell Street because the smallest voice in the whole story turned out to be holding the one thread that could pull it apart. Monday, March 24, 2025. Day 112. On a clock I had been counting since the 3rd of December. The truck ran rough on the hill, and I let it run rough. Della had the storm door unlatched before I was halfway up the walk, like she had been watching that street for a week, and had finally caught something worth watching. The plastic was still on the good chair. I sat on the couch. I told her what happened on the loading dock. I told her the name he said, and how he said it low under his breath, the way a man tries a key in a lock that is not his house yet. She did not ask me to say it twice. She went into the back room and came out with the hat box, set it on the low table, took the lid off, and turned it over. 30 years came out in a slide of paper. Letters in a young man's hand. Envelopes gone soft at the corners. The way cotton goes soft after enough washings, postmarked 1989 and 1990. A birth record with a line in it. 2 receipts. A photograph she laid face down, then turned back over herself because she was finished deciding what other people got to see. Her hands sorted while she talked. 46 years measuring cloth by eye, and she never squared a stack twice. That one first, she said. The rest makes sense after that one. I read it. Then I read the one beneath it. I did not fold anything. In that front room it felt wrong to fold paper in thirds and put it in a pocket, so I set each page back down flat, where she could see it. You'd say all this out loud in front of them? I asked. I've been quiet 30 years, Della said. I'm done. It could get ugly. Good. Ugly's honest. Pretty is what got us all here. She walked me out, 79 years old, and she still went to the door with a guest, one hand on the frame, the cold coming in off Bell Street around her ankles. One more thing, she added. Whatever they try, watch the paperwork. Paper remembers what people forget. That's a seamstress talking, I said. That's a woman who signed 40 years of papers in front of the same man talking, she said. Harold Mercer, notary public. I buried him in January of 2023, and I kept the card. I said I was sorry for her friend, and she said, everybody is sorry 2 winters late. And I went down the walk and got in the truck and drove back across town with a hatbox belted into the passenger seat like a child. Harold Mercer meant nothing to me that night. He was a name attached to a stamp, attached to an old woman's grief. That is the honest measure of what I knew on March 24th. Wednesday, March 26th, the conference table on the 34th floor of 1400 Halden Avenue. Frost had the room cold, which I appreciated. He built the file the way other men build a wall, one course at a time, nothing set until the course below it had cured. 3 stacks, 2 files. He was very particular about the difference. This stack and this stack travel together, he said, hand flat on the first 2. Cascade Thermal Services, $4.6 million across 18 months, every approval, carrying the same signature. And Freezer Bay 4, October 17th, the altered incident report. The 2-hour gap in the safety log, 4 denied requisitions for scrubbers and full-face respirators across 4 budget cycles. Together, they establish that an officer of this company placed his own interest above the company's and above the people working in it. That is a breach of fiduciary duty, which is the legal duty an officer owes the company and its shareholders. It is sufficient to remove him for cause, meaning removal, for proven misconduct, rather than at the pleasure of the board. The safety material also goes to OSHA, the Federal Workplace Safety Authority, and to the county attorney. Those referrals are not mine to soften. And the third, I said. He tapped his pen twice, though there was no bad news in it. The third stack is the bloodline. Letters the struck line in the family record, the sworn account of Mrs. Hartman. That stack does not touch the company at all. It goes to the probate court, which is the court that admits or rejects a will and settles who inherits. If those pages ever get mixed with the other 2 opposing counsel, says the removal was a family quarrel dressed up as governance, and every honest thing in the first 2 stacks starts to smell. He squared the edge with one finger. Clean files, Mr. Doyle. Keep them clean and they cut. Mix them and they smear. You're saying the fraud is company business and the blood is court business. I am saying that as majority shareholder, you have one authority, and as a private man, you have another, and you will use them in separate rooms on the same day. He wrote a line in his book. The board meeting is fixed, Tuesday, April 8th. Friday, March 28. I drove back to Bell Street with a typed statement for her to read before a notary public, and she read it twice out loud, the second time correcting one date. April 8th, she said. I want a chair in that room. It's not a place for you. It's the only place for me. He's my sister's grandson, and I let it sit 30 years. She handed the pages back squared. Get me a chair. Watch the paperwork, she told me at the door, and she said it the way people say things they have already dreamed about, as if she knew exactly which forged page was coming and had simply been waiting for it. There is a stillness before a storm that is not peace at all. It is the sound of everything quietly getting into position. And for 7 days after Della told me to watch the paperwork, that is all I could hear. Monday, March 31, day 119. I clocked in at 5 with badge 0471 and did exactly what the sheet told me to do. The compressors ran the way they had run for 34 years, a low knock in number 3 that I heard the way a man hears his own furnace through a wall. Marcus passed me on the dock at 7, with his breath going ragged in the 28-degree air, and he did not ask me anything, and I did not tell him anything. Nobody on that floor knew. That was the point. At home there was one chair, an empty paper cup on a shelf where a photograph used to sit, and a 6-inch steel machinist rule on the kitchen table where I could put 2 fingers on it while I read. I read every night that week. Cold coffee black, a house that made no sound back at me. Tuesday, April 1. I drove the truck downtown after shift and rode the elevator to the 34th floor with plant grease still under my nails. Frost had the resolution laid out in pieces, and we built it line by line the way you rebuild a valve, one part at a time, nothing forced. It removed the director of operations for cause, which means removal on proven misconduct, rather than at the pleasure of the board, and it named its grounds instead of gesturing at them. Exhibit A was Cascade Thermal Services, LLC, $4.6 million, across 18 months, every approval, carrying a looping signature with a long tail on the J. Exhibit B was Freezer Bay 4 and the 2-hour hole in the safety log for the night of October 17. Say the part I care about, I said. You care about the plant. I care about the men in it. The plant does not close, Frost said. Removing an officer does not remove a business. The maintenance line gets restored, the scrubbers and the full-face respirators get bought. And they get bought because the man holding the voting shares says buy them, and no one in that building can say no. How long? Order them the same week. They arrive when they arrive. I do not promise dates I do not control. Wednesday. He walked me through the room itself, since I had never been in it. I would be seated as majority shareholder, not as a guest, not as an employee, and the corporate secretary would confirm the 71% block before a single word of business was read. The vote would be mine before anyone finished being surprised. The criminal referral and the file for OSHA would go out separately on their own paper through their own doors. And the bloodline, the letters, the struck-out line in the family record, none of that belonged in a boardroom. That was probate court, a different building and a different fight. 2 rooms one day, I said. 2 rooms one day. In the first, you are an owner exercising control. In the second, you are a private man. An officer owes the company a fiduciary duty, which is a legal obligation to put the company ahead of himself. Every page in this resolution shows him breaking it. Do not muddy that with family. Thursday, April 3, day 122. I spent 90 minutes on my back under a conveyor drive greasing a bearing that had been squealing since February. My left knee complained the way it has since 2009. It was the most ordinary work of my life, and I did it carefully because a man about to change everything should be able to prove he can still finish something small. Friday, April 4, I signed the resolution draft in Frost's office with the black ballpoint out of my chest pocket, the same pen I signed the divorce papers with in December. I read all 11 pages first. I folded my copy in thirds and put it in my coat. The board convenes in a week, Frost said, ready to be seen. I've been invisible so long I forget what it looks like. You will find it is loud. He capped his own pen. One more thing. Julian's been meeting an out-of-state attorney. Off the books. 3 weeks now. For what? I don't know. Not licensed here, not on any filing, not in any calendar I can subpoena today. Then it's nothing. Men like him don't hire quiet lawyers for quiet reasons, Frost said. Della told me to watch the paperwork, I said. Then we will read every page they hand us out loud if it comes to that. He tapped his pen twice on the oak. I heard those 2 taps the rest of the weekend. Saturday, I changed the oil in the truck. Sunday, I sat with the machinist rule in my hand and turned it over 6 inches of steel that a 91-year-old man kept on his desk for 52 years because it did not lie about a measurement. I slept maybe 4 hours across 2 nights. Not fear. Something closer to the feeling you get standing next to a pressure vessel and knowing the gauge is reading low. Monday, April 7, day 126. I worked a full shift, walked out at 3, and came home and pressed the charcoal suit on the kitchen table with a towel under it. Sleeves, lapels, the trousers, twice. I hung it on the closet door, where I would see it when I woke. The empty cup sat on its shelf. The rule lay on the table with the resolution folded in thirds beside it, and the meeting was set for Tuesday, April 8th, and the only unknown left in the entire file was a lawyer nobody could name. I buttoned the charcoal jacket in front of the closet mirror at midnight, and for the first time in 34 years, the man looking back at me was not the mechanic, he was the weather about to come through the door. I rode the elevator to the top floor in a charcoal suit on the 127th day, and for once, nobody asked me to fix the air on the way up. Tuesday, April 8th, 10 in the morning. The carpet on the 34th floor ate the sound of my boots the way it always had, and I had polished them anyway out of habit, the way you wipe down a machine you are about to shut off for good. Frost met me at the glass doors with the folder under his arm and 2 exhibits already tabbed. The boardroom ran the length of the east wall, glass on 3 sides. Fort Merrick laid out under a flat white sky, a table long enough to bowl on water glasses filled and untouched. 9 chairs down the sides with 9 board members in them, and 1 chair empty at the head. Della Mae Hartman sat at the back by the credenza in her good coat, with her purse on her knees. 79 years old, a retired seamstress, who had spent 46 years measuring other people's work by eye, and she had asked to be here. I set my folder on the oak and laid the 6-inch steel machinist rule on top of it square with the edge of the table. Then I sat down in the chair at the head of the table. Nobody said anything for 4 seconds. I counted them the way you count the seconds after you throw a breaker, waiting to hear whether the compressor picks up or the whole hall goes quiet. A woman 2 seats down looked at Frost. The rest of them looked at me at the hands at the knuckles at a 58-year-old maintenance mechanic sitting where the chairman sits. Julian came in last, the way he always did, charcoal overcoat over his arm and his gloves still on, and he was 3 steps into the room before he saw me. "This meeting's a mistake," he said. "Whoever let a mechanic up here?" "The majority owner let him up here," Frost said. "Say hello, Mr. Doyle." The room turned as one. Julian's mouth opened and closed. "Sit down, Julian," I said. "First, you'll hear who I am. Then you'll hear what you've done." He did not sit. Frost tapped his pen twice on the oak and opened the first tab. 71% of the voting shares, Frost said, since the 14th of November. The estate of Mr. Renner passed the control block to Mr. Doyle on the day he died. Mr. Doyle has been the majority shareholder of this company for 145 days. You've been on the floor this whole time, Julian said, and his voice finally cracked. Sweeping Frost. Somebody had to, I said. The man who owned the place was busy dying, and the man running it was busy stealing. That was the second time I spoke, and I did not speak again for 11 minutes. Julian pulled out a chair halfway down the table, the seat he had never once sat in, and lowered himself into it, without taking his gloves off. Frost went in order, which is the only way to take a machine apart. Exhibit 1, Cascade Thermal Services, LLC, a coolant and maintenance vendor, with no crews, no yard, no equipment, and no history before the first contract. Exhibit 2, $4.6 million paid across 18 months on inflated maintenance contracts routed through a shell entity, which means a company that exists on paper to move money and nothing else. Exhibit 3, the approvals, every one of them carrying the same looping signature with the long tail on the J. Exhibit 4, 4 requisitions filed by a refrigeration technician named Marcus Bell for ammonia scrubbers and full-face respirators, denied across 4 budget cycles, while the phantom vendor was paid on time. Exhibit 5, the incident report from Freezer Bay 4 on the night of October 17, 2024, altered after filing. Exhibit 6, the safety log for that shift with 2 hours missing out of the middle of it. Nobody at the table drank any water. One board member took his glasses off and set them down and did not put them back on. Frost closed the folder and looked at me, and I put my black ballpoint on the oak next to the rule. Under this company's own governance, I said the board may remove an officer for cause, which means proven misconduct, not a matter of taste and not a matter of whose family anybody is. I moved the removal of the director of operations for cause. Grounds documented in Exhibits 1 through 6. Breach of fiduciary duty being the duty an officer owes this company and its shareholders, and I hold 71% of the voting shares. Referrals to follow, 1 to the prosecutor and 1 to OSHA, the Federal Workplace Safety Authority, on the ammonia file. That was all of it. 34 years of fixing what I was allowed to fix, and it came out in 90 seconds and sounded like a work order. 2 board members asked for the vote. The woman 2 seats down said second, and a man at the far end said, "Call it," and somebody started reading names. Della did not move. She had not said one word since the elevator. I watched Julian because a gauge tells you more than a man does, and because I had raised him from the age of 4, and I knew what his face did before it broke. He had backed up against the glass without knowing he had done it, 34 floors of white sky behind him, and 9 people watching, and he had stopped arguing. Then he found his old smile, the one he always used before he said something cruel, and I understood that the out-of-state attorney nobody could name had been worth every dollar he cost. Before anyone votes, Julian said maybe someone should ask a probate court whose blood Silas Renner really was. He had been holding one card back the whole time, and he laid it down the way a man does who has never once lost a hand in his life. The room came apart in a way that carpet like that is built to prevent. Chairs went back on their casters. A woman 2 seats down said what not as a question. Somebody's water glass got knocked half an inch, and nobody said it right. 34 floors up, with white sky pressed against the glass, and 9 directors of Renner Group Holdings stopped being a board and turned into 9 people who had just heard a name they thought was buried. Silas Renner left everything to his own blood, Julian said. To me, it's filed with the probate court as we speak. I did not stand up. A man who stands up is a man who thinks he has to hold something down. I sat back into the chair, and I put my hands flat on the oak, the way I put them flat on a compressor housing when I am listening for the knock under the hum, and I let the room make its noise around me. You do not learn much watching a man. You learn everything watching a gauge. So I watched the 9 faces instead of Julian's, and I counted. The bloodline landed hard, and it landed hard because it was true. That is the trouble with true things. Silas disowned his only son in 1989 and never said the name again, and he died on November 14, 2024. At 91 years old, without ever knowing, a grandson had been walking his hallways in an overcoat signing approvals with that long tail on the J. I had spent February learning it. Julian had spent longer, and every director in that glass room had known Silas well enough to know he would have wanted to be told. Then Julian did the second thing, which was the real thing. He nodded at the door, and a courier envelope came down the table, stiff cardboard, the seal already broken. Inside were photocopies, and the photocopies went hand to hand around that table like a work order going down a line. A newly discovered will of Silas Aldous Renner. 2 pages naming Julian Peter Voss, sole heir of the estate. A notary public seal at the bottom, and a date stamped under it, June 12, 2024. His out-of-state attorney, a man none of us could put a face to, had filed it with the probate court that morning before 9. I understood what I was holding. If the probate court ever admitted that document the will Frost had read to me in December stopped existing. The 71% of the voting shares that carried control of this company stopped being mine. It stopped being separate property, an inheritance that belongs to one spouse alone and is not divided in a divorce because it would never have been an inheritance at all. Majority shareholder is a title the court can take back the same way it hands it out. Julian did not have to win anything in that room. He only needed 9 people to hesitate. 3 of them did. I watched it happen. A man at the far end who had said, "Call it a minute" earlier, put the photocopy down and did not pass it along. 2 others looked at Frost instead of at me, which is what people do when they want a lawyer to tell them the floor is still there. The door opened behind me. Lorraine came in wearing the good gray wool coat, the one she keeps brushed, and she stopped 3 steps inside and folded her hands in front of her, the way she does when she does not want anyone to see the tremor. 20 years married, and she never once set foot in the plant. She found her way here in under an hour. "How long have you known you were his grandson?" I said. Julian looked at me then. No smile in the eyes, just the shape of one on his mouth. "Long enough to know what's mine." "Blood doesn't beat a valid will, Julian," I said. "Which is exactly why you'd need a new one. Let's read every line of it out loud." That is a sentence Frost taught me in February, sitting at his conference table with the machinist rule between us. Blood does not inherit in this state. Paper does. A grandson can be a grandson all day long, and it buys him nothing against a will the probate court has already accepted. Which meant a new will had to appear, and it had appeared 4 months and change after the old man went into the ground. "Read it," Lorraine said fast before anyone else could speak. "It's valid. It was witnessed. I have known that voice for 20 years. I have heard it order a roast, and I have heard it read a hospital bill out loud without reading the number. It had never once sounded the way it sounded in that room. It was not certainty. It was a woman standing in a doorway, with her hands folded, frightened enough to speak for her son, in front of 9 strangers, and I felt something in my chest go quiet and cold and careful. Frost set his pen down and tapped it twice against the oak. "Then there's no harm in the room hearing the date," he said. So they read it. The corporate secretary took a copy and read it, standing line by line, the way you read a bill of materials when a part has come in wrong, and you need to prove it before anybody will let you send it back. Testamentary language. Revocation of all prior wills. Sole heir. the signature line and the looping name above it. Then the block at the bottom, the notary public, the commission, and the date. June 12th, 2024. The room went quiet enough to hear the building's air move. And at the back, Della Hartman stood up out of her chair, 79 years old, her handbag held in both hands in front of her coat, and said, "That date is impossible. It only takes one true fact said out loud at the right moment to bring down a mountain of careful lies," and Della Hartman had been carrying hers in a handbag all morning. She did not come up to the table. She stood where she was at the back near the credenza with the water pitchers on it, 79 years old, in a coat. She had probably sewn the lining of herself, and she waited until the corporate secretary lowered the photocopy to the oak. 9 board members leaned in over it. The document lay flat under the lights, the looping signature, the block at the bottom, the seal. "Say that again, please," Frost said. "The date." "June 12th, 2024, the secretary said. "Harold Mercer notarized nothing that year," Della said. "He was 17 months in the ground before anybody pressed that stamp." Nobody moved. In a plant, you learn the sound a room makes when a machine that has been running wrong finally stops. And this was that sound, a whole floor of noise going out at once. Della opened the handbag. She did not rummage. She reached in the way a woman reaches for a thing she has kept in the same pocket of the same bag for 2 years, and she brought out a folded funeral card, cream-colored soft at the crease from handling. "Harold Mercer," she said. "Notary public in this city for 38 years. He did my papers, he did my sister's papers. He stamped the deed on Bell Street when I bought it. He died the 9th of January, 2023. I sat in the second pew. I brought a dish to the house after." She held the card up so the room could see it, not high, just enough. "I don't know your law. I sewed for 46 years, but a dead man can't put his stamp on a paper a year and a half after you've put him in the ground. That's not law. That's arithmetic." She sat down. 90 seconds, maybe less. It took a mechanic's daughter and a hatbox full of letters and a funeral card in a handbag to break something 2 attorneys had built to look like marble. The counsel who had come in that morning with the newly discovered will of Silas Renner reached for the copy and stopped his hand halfway, and that stopping was the loudest thing he did all day. Because up until Della stood up, that paper had been a rival claim. A thing lawyers argue about in probate court. A thing that costs money and time and gets settled on a courthouse bench. 1 sentence later, it was forgery. Forgery is not an argument. Forgery is a crime, and everyone at that table did the math in the same breath. Frost set his pen down and tapped it twice against the oak. "Mr. Voss," he said, "before you speak, I would remind you that 9 people are taking minutes." Julian's face did the arithmetic faster than anybody's. I watched it happen. I had watched that face since it was 4 years old and needed a stool to reach the sink, and I knew every gear in it, and I had never seen the whole works turn over that quick. He did not smile. That was how I knew it was real. For 34 years, the boy had smiled first and cut second, and now there was no smile left in the machine, only the calculation, and the calculation took less than 10 seconds. He turned to his mother. "This was her scheme," Julian said. "She forged it. I knew nothing." Lorraine was standing by the door in the good gray wool coat still buttoned, her hands folded the way she folds them when the tremor is bad, and she does not want a room to see it. "Julian," she breathed. "Don't," he snapped. "You dragged me into your mess. Look at the handwriting. Look at who had the papers. I never touched that document." And the boy I raised stepped behind his mother one last time. Not the way he did it in a break room in December, grinning over a steel table with a bent corner while she slid an envelope across it. This time he put her between himself and the door, the way you put a pallet between yourself and a forklift, and he never once looked at her while he did it. "I raised you," I said. It was the only thing I said in that whole room that sounded like a man in pain, and I did not stand up to say it. "Sit down, Mr. Voss," Frost said. "Everything in this file goes to the prosecutor this afternoon." He said the rest of it flat the way he reads a bill of costs. The vendor file went with it. Cascade Thermal Services, LLC, $4.6 million across 18 months to a company with no crews and no yard, every approval carrying the same signature with the long tail on the J. The safety file went to OSHA, the Federal Workplace Safety Authority, the altered incident report, and the 2-hour gap in the log for the night of October 17, 2024, Freezer Bay 4. One man who nearly did not come back out of the cold. The document on the table went to the probate court with Della's affidavit attached, and the estate of Silas Renner remained exactly what it had been since November. "The bloodline claim," one of the directors said. "Is he Renner blood or isn't he?" "He is," Frost said. "It changes nothing. Mr. Renner's will is valid, and his intent was expressed. Blood is not a claim. It's a fact with no legal weight here." Then he put the resolution. Removal of the Director of Operations for cause for breach of fiduciary duty, the duty an officer owes the company and the people who own it. He read the language, and he did not hurry it. I signed my part with the black ballpoint, out of my chest pocket. The same pen and the majority shareholders' block carried it before the count reached 4. They took the badge and the phone at the table. Julian went out without his coat, left standing alone in the middle of that room with her coat still buttoned. Lorraine turned to me with her face coming apart and said, "There's one thing about me you never knew, Walter. For 20 years I thought I knew that woman. And standing in a corridor with the whole city behind glass, I had one conversation left, in which to learn how wrong I had been." The boardroom door pulled itself shut behind us on a slow hinge, the way expensive doors do, taking the sound of 9 directors with it. The corridor on the 34th floor ran long and quiet. Carpet that ate footsteps. A bench against the wall that nobody had ever sat on the cushion, still tight as the day it came out of the wrapping. Past the bench, the elevator. Past the glass. Fort Merrick lay flat and gray under an April sky, the rail spur out east somewhere under all that haze, the plant running its compressors without me. Lorraine stopped 6 feet short of the bench. Her gray wool coat was still buttoned to the throat. It was a good coat. She had bought it in a year when we could not afford it, and she had made it last 11, brushing it down at the door every night like a woman going somewhere. She had her hands out in front of her, and she was not folding them. That was the thing I noticed. Not her face, which had already gone. Her hands open, shaking no place to hide. "I'm sick, Walter," Lorraine said. "Have been a long time. The debt buried me." The elevator chimed at the far end for a floor that was not ours, and went away again. "You could have told me." "And be pitied." Her chin came up out of old habit, and then gave out. "I'd rather be hated." "You got your wish for a while," I said. "But I never did learn how to hate you. I only learned how to let go." She told me the rest standing up, because sitting down on that bench would have made it a scene, and she never in her life allowed herself a scene. 2 years of tests she paid cash for, so nothing would show up on a statement I might read. A diagnosis she carried home on a Thursday and put in her purse. Then the specialists, then the treatments that were not covered, then the letters with the windows in them, the ones that come every month, whether you open them or not. She had been paying the minimum on 4 accounts, and a 5th had gone to collections in September. 22 years of keeping other people's closings tidy at a title office, and her own numbers had eaten her alive in the dark. I did the arithmetic on it while she talked. Not the money. The years. She had been sitting across a kitchen table from me the whole time with her hands folded in her lap. He knew, I said. He found out. She said it flat, the way you say a thing you have already said to yourself 1,000 times at 2 in the morning. He looked at my accounts. He said he could make all of it go away in one afternoon. He said there was money that belonged to us and other people were sitting on it. Her mouth moved. He said it would fix everything. He said it was owed to us. He said that to you the way he said it to me, I said. He just never once meant us. She had raised him. I had raised him too, from 4 years old, close enough to count. Neither of us had ever seen the shape of him until this year. She had signed the paper he put in front of her, because a drowning person will grab the hand that reaches, and she had told herself she was not really reading it, and she had known exactly what it was. A dead man's seal on a document that a dead man could not have stamped. Forgery has a plain name, and she had heard the plain name in that room today, said out loud by an attorney in cufflinks in front of the 9 people whose good opinion she had spent her whole life renting. Then her son had walked out through that door without his coat and without looking at her. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I want that understood." "I know. I'm not asking you to forgive me either." "I know that too." That was what made it land. If she had asked, I would have had somewhere to put my hands. She did not ask. She stood in a corridor with her coat buttoned and her tremor out in the open, and she took it standing. And I understood 4 months late that the woman who put divorce papers dated November 27th, 2024 on a steel table with a bent corner had not been a schemer with a plan. She had been steered. Somebody had found the fear in her and turned it like a valve. "What happens to me now?" "What you signed happens to you now," I said. "I'm not going to add to it, and I'm not going to lift it." I had every card in that building. $1,200,000,000. 71% of the voting shares. A file going to a prosecutor with her handwriting sitting in the middle of it, and another one going to the probate court, and 9 directors down the hall who would have voted whatever I put in front of them by then. I did not use one of them on her. I did not spend one of them for her either. There is a kind of mercy that is really just another hand on the valve, and I had watched what that did. "You want to know something?" I said. "December 3rd, the break room door. Your hand was shaking harder than mine that morning, and I read it as nerve. It wasn't. You were sick, and you were in over your head, and you were about to do the worst thing you would ever do, and your body knew it before either of us did." She looked at me for a long moment. "You were always the only one who ever read a thing correctly," she said. I thought of a paper cup on a shelf in my kitchen empty since day one, and I did not say anything about it. I told her to take the elevator first. She did not. She sat down on the bench nobody sits on and put her hands flat on her knees to keep them still. I walked toward the elevator with a whole corporation standing behind me and understood that the last thing left to decide was not what to do with the money. It was what kind of man I was going to be while I was holding it. I rode the elevator down 34 floors alone. Here is the lesson plain. God gave me 1 life and 100 chances to spend it on the wrong argument. And I spent 34 years believing that if I worked hard enough and stayed quiet enough, the people at my own kitchen table would notice. They did not. All this family revenge, the folder, the bent steel table, the 71% never bought me back one evening. I let pass in silence. So don't be like me. Don't wait 20 years to ask your wife what she is carrying in her purse. Don't let your pride teach your son that a man's worth is what he can take. Ask the hard question, while it is still only a kitchen table before it has to become a boardroom. My opinion, for what it is worth. Family revenge is a poor kind of justice. It corrects the ledger and leaves the house empty. A dad revenge is never really about money. I won my dad revenge and it tasted like an empty paper cup. Remember this from my family, revenge. The dad revenge you win is never worth the truth you failed to tell in time. A gentle warning. Before we go on, some details in the stories ahead are fictional, shaped for the lesson inside them. If that is not what you came for, step away kindly and choose something that serves you better. If this found you somewhere tender, tell me in the comments what you would have done in that corridor. Share it with someone who needs it tonight, and subscribe to Bitter Autumn, where every ending leaves a little light. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end.